Dear colleagues, this is Dr. Jagannatham, faculty, Center for Gandhian Thought and Peace Studies, Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar. Today's presentation, I'll just start with very 4 to 5 important aspects. First would be, who are the Adivasis? That is very important to understand who are the Adivasis in the country. To deal with that, I'll also talk about democracy, constitution, and tribals. To understand the empowerment of tribals, are their problems or their concerns, I will try to focus upon the paradigm shift in development model. Further, I'll emphasize on policies and protections. Later on, I also talk about development, displacement, and migration. Then I'll try to summarize with concluding remarks or some suggestions. Now I'll just talk about who are the Adivasis, indigenous and tribals. It is all know that the term indigenous people, though the recent coinage at the international level, has been in use in India for a long time. In fact, many have been using the term Adivasis, the term for the indigenous people, freely to refer to the tribal people since the turn of the present century. The term, in conjunction with other related terms such as aborigines, etc., has also been extensively used by scholars and administrators in their writings. The term was used mainly as a mark of identification and differentiation. The features of using the term tribe based on physical feature, language, religion, custom, and social organization, etc. Even Guriya, who otherwise talks of tribals as a backward Hindus, and as reservation about the use of the term Adivasi, refers to them as identifies 461 tribal communities in India. They constitute 8.8% of the total population 1991 census. The share of the scheduled tribe population to the total population in 1971 and 1981 was 6.94 and 7.85% respectively. The question of tribes in India is closely linked with the administrative and political considerations. Hence, there has been increasing demand by groups and communities for their inclusion in the list of scheduled tribes of the Indian Constitution. The partly that partly explains the steady increase in the proportion of the scheduled tribe population in India. There has been more concerns with the identification of tribals than with their definition. There did exist some conceptions such as features as geographical isolation, simple technology, and condition of living, general backwardness to the practice of tribal language, physical features, etc. Because of their problems, because of isolation of tribals, because of underdevelopment of tribals, because of exclusion, marginalization of tribals, Indian Constitution, in the preamble itself, it clearly enumerated the rights for the tribals in India. Preamble talks about equality, liberty, fraternity. These actually applies for the tribal empowerment. If you Notwithstanding this, we have statutory regulations, Article 342, and Article 330 and 332 talks about proportional representation in Parliament and in state assemblies. In Article 19, Clause 5, reasonable restrictions on others to enter and settle in tribal areas. Friends, besides this, there is very important act for the empowerment of tribals, that is Land Acquisition Act 1984. However, but this has act as a colonial uh, legacy. It has been continued. Though there was a serious displacement of tribals due to development, but this act provides only cash compensation but not land. Actually, this act did not go behind monetary compensation, but only they have given cash. And this actually restricted only these benefits. Compensation actually restricted only to the landowners but not tribals, because tribals only own customary rights, but uh, not very constitutional right, but they have customary rights. Therefore, they were denied compensation, though they lose their own land. Another very important act, PESA Act, that is 1996. This act enables self-govern their natural resources and extends tribals to take decision on their own. And the forest dwellers, another act, there's a forest dwellers, SCs, STs, and other traditional forest dwellers act 2006. It talks about right to hold the land in the forest areas, right to own the resources, but there are many limitations to these acts. Therefore, the other act has come, that is 2013 act. According to 2013 act, this act is actually very important for the empowerment of tribals who are displaced from their own land. Land ownership, owners will be given paid compensation for them. And this act is very important. Before they acquire the land, they strictly has to follow the act. As per the act, there has to be referendum mechanism, has to be evolved, and approval of 80% of landowners is very important in the, as per this act. Without the approval of popular landowners, it is very difficult to acquire the land from the landowners, because that's how this act became very important. And uh, and one more very important aspect, that and four times of the price you have to pay for the victims, people who are going to lose the land. It is a responsibility of the uh, state or the agencies to pay not less than four times of the for in a rural from the rural areas. If it is urban, it is two times they have to pay to the land owners. And but this act sometimes very important. There's a positive change in the acts of the government. This act actually, you can protect and promote the rights of the tribals in India. But drawback of this act was that public purpose. They said public purpose. They didn't actually define what actually public purpose which means. Therefore, today there are many states are using this act, are not following strictly. There are many states came up with their own acts to sideline this act, like Telangana and Andhra Pradesh and other states as well. It is very important to understand. After independence, India came up with many 5-year plans. First 5-year plan actually talked about uh, development, holistic development, and it is this development actually is based on Gandhian principles. And government of India has been implemented the community development program based on the Gandhian constructive programs. However, there was a drastic shift in the development model from the agriculture to the industrial sector by the end of 1954. Because if you find second 5-year plan, there is a rapid industrialization and the economic development in the country, and emphasized on achieving social and economical rights. And also, this second 5-year plan actually tried to promote the public sector and follow a socialistic pattern of development, develop heavy industries, strengthen the foundations of economical implement independence, increase production and consumer goods, through expansion of labor intensive village and small scale industries. But after 1970s, there's a drastic change in the development model. The state started or entered into the process of globalization. When we entered the globalization process, state's role became only facilitator, rather it's a only protect the interest of people directly. Therefore, third phase actually it's a liberalization, privatization, and the globalization. This development of projects generally because of this privatization, globalization, so people directly came up with and started industries and other industries and other projects in the country. These actually raises important questions of equity, fairness, and justice, and equality before law in the matter of distribution of benefits and burdens. This has given rise to protest movements in the country. And this new economic policy further actually widened the gap. And private industrialists, private when foreign investment actually came up to the country, and they actually started constructing industries. They're directly involved in the construction of dams. They're least bothered about the development of tribals or the problems of tribals, their cultural aspects, their geographical location, their actual simplicity, what they believe in. They have completely ignored the tribals, actually their culture, their sentiments, their traditions, their development model, because they are very close to the resources, forest. They live, their profession is based on the forests resources. But these private actually agencies, and they ignored, they without any substantial participation of these groups or consent of these groups, they constructed the industries in the tribal localities in the country. That's how you see many problems in Orissa. Now we call it as a Odisha, and Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and many other states. You find these resistances from the tribals because of this attitude of private industrialists when they start industries in the country. And many you see the impact of projects on the tribals, particularly when they came and started constructing dams and power plants, industries, parks, right? Other very important industries. They have not taken care of the place. That's why there is a serious problem of displacement and serious economic, social, and cultural disturbances of the lives of the tribals. That's how you see when we talk about this development, actually, this induced displacement. India, due to development, is quite historical. Displacement quite historical. The most attractive zones for the developmental projects have always been the forest resources, river systems, and mineral base, and have been displaced many parts of the Indian society. Moreover, most of the developmental projects are located in the most backward areas in the populated by tribals, because you see tribals constitute approximately 8.2% of the India's more than 1 billion population. More than 40% of the development induced displacement are tribal population. And if you find, as per the scholar Serenais in 1990, he came up with 7 dimensions of information risk induced by displacement. They are actually landlessness, joblessness, hopelessness, marginalization, food insecurity, morbidity, and social articulation. And agricultural laborers, including tenants, small private enterprises like workshops, rural industries, artisan units, etc., small shopkeepers, service workers, vendors, and others. While each of these characteristics are distinct and irreducible, they share a common denominator. All are the dimensions of a multifaceted process of empowerment. These characters may be linked into a coherent typology or descriptive model of empowerment risk through displacement. And risk of development, there is a scholar called Fernandez and Asif. They talked about risk of development. They talked about four types of risks. One is economic risk, other one is social risk, and third one is very important. There is a common property risk, and another very important, there is a psychological risk. If you talk about economical risk, as per the economic risk, is a kind of you lose your job, migration to another place, loss of productivity, and homelessness and migration. When you talk about social risk, we have a loss of neighborhood, loss of social and cultural institutions, loss of education, and violation of human rights. So when you lose your land, when you are displaced, and your cultures and your traditions, now you are going to lose your neighbors. So you say no, you go to some other place where you don't find neighbors. Then sometimes very important, there is a memories very important. So whatever memories that you carry from your childhood, once you are displaced from your own land, so you lose your memories, right? You go far away from your own native citizens or native people who lived with them for the long time. That's why these risks are very important, but tribals really have faced this risk because of this induced development. And migration is very important because migration is a multifaceted and vary from one to another. So when you migrate from one place, you loss of resources, inaccessibility to the resources, and lack of employability in surroundings where people living causes for migration of communities from one place to another. When you migrate to another place, you don't find job. If you find the job also, that you are not familiar with that job, sometimes you are not expertise in that area to do work, right? When, for example, when fisherman migrates to one place to other place, so for him is very difficult to do his own job because of many other place of change of the place and the resources and the people around them. That's why due to construction of medium irrigation projects at their region, cultivable land were submerged, and they have lost connectivity and accessibility to the forest resources on which they dependent for their substance for years together in changing circumstances. Therefore, migration actually had a adverse impact on tribals. Once if you see in many countries, migration actually they don't get jobs, new places. They're not experts in the area where they wanted to get the new jobs, and there is no they lose their bargaining power as well. That is very important. They lose their bargaining power, so they cannot bargain. Not only that, if they want to go for education, if they want to send their children to schools, they don't get easy admissions in the schools, because identification is very important. Once if they move to other place, identification problem they face. They don't have vote in that particular place, and they don't have connections, or they don't have any mobility, right? And they don't have any argument to convince the authorities to help them, because they don't have proper identification. That's why, so because of migration, consequences are very serious. Particularly tribals, already they are illiterates, they're alienated, and they face many psychological, social problems, and economical problems. Again, because of migration, they are forced to face many other problems. And that is what, because of this development, induced development, so migration is very important. Because of migration, they face lot of problems. As I already told, loss of homes, joblessness, distribution of formal education activities, loss of control over common property resources, loss of religious and cultural identity, and health problems. And status of tribal women is very important, because women actually they are not in tribal society. You find women is not in a patriarchal society, they are in matriarchal society. They enjoy equality in the tribal society, liberty. They enjoy on par with the men in tribal society, and they don't have any domination on women by their own men folk. But once they migrate to the other places, new places, women actually, so they face a lot of problems, and they have to depend, all most of the time they depend on forest resources for their livelihood. But women, if they migrate from place to other place, it became very difficult for them for their survival and to live with dignity and decent life. That is why illegitimization and political unrest also takes place because of all these problems. And because of these reasons, I think we all have to, government have came up with many acts in the country since independence. As I told, in the constitution already there are values, there are provisions in the constitution. But government of India, all the governments starting from Nehru, Indira Gandhi, and Vajpayee, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and today government, they are coming up with many policies to empower them, to develop tribals, to make them live with dignity. There is a many Narega program is there, and through which they get employment, and there are many other policies, and of course there is a separate provisions in the constitution, as I said, and there is a separate schedules in the constitution. Fifth and sixth schedule talks about tribals empowerment. Policies are very important for any country. Along with the policies, implementation also equally important. All the governments came up with many fellowships for the poor tribal students, scholarship for the tribal students, and a free education for the schools for the tribals. NDA government came up with very important policies like Vanabandhu Kalyana Yojana scheme, very important, through which this actually broadly a process, this policy as a process through which it aims at achieving overall development tribal people through convergence of available resources with an outcome based approach monitored by independent agency. And it also talks about improving the quality of life in tribal areas, improving the quality of education, qualitative and sustainable employability for tribal families, bridging the infrastructure gaps with focus on quality, production of tribal culture and heritage. And for example, even tribal women is very important for them. So government of India, government came up with tribal women self-help groups through which they have provided microfinance, through which microfinance, and which means they provide loans, small loans for tribal women to help them engage in production activities and grow and do business on their own. And there are many policies to improve their livelihood. That's why these policies are very important. And then implementation also very important. So we have a missionary district level and state level, district level, and taluka level and village level. Each and every stage implementation is very important. Not only framing the policies for the empowerment of tribals, but implementation is also equally important. Without serious implementation, it is very difficult to uh, see the policies to be implemented, because it needs commitment of officers and cooperation of tribals and response of the other civil society organizations in the country to see that these policies to be implemented effectively. There are many policies, though there are policies, though there are acts, but sometimes implementation is very important. Implementation, there is a serious problem in implementations. There are many policies, acts, when they go for the construction of dams, they strictly have to follow. They have to, whoever displaced, they have to be provided rehabilitation process, rehabilitated. They have to rehabilitate it. But without rehabilitation, there are many projects are constructed. And after, because of, there are many policies, like for example, you see the Polavaram project in Andhra Pradesh today. Polavaram today, 7 mandals of the tribals, the 7 mandals of Seven mandals are actually now today they merged with Andhra Pradesh, because if they merge with Andhra Pradesh, so they can be this project can be constructed very fastly. But they have not seriously thought of tribals, lives of tribals. Today the tribals are really they're in helpless in Polavaram project. People around the Polavaram project, they are now today these governments are going for the elections, but many tribes this region or in these mandals are not having a right to vote. In which state they have to vote, still they have not finalized, and people are demanding the voting right for them. That's why response of the state towards these persons is very important. And there are many states like coming up with a single window system. If they apply for construction of any dam project or any industry in the country, the states, their states, mainly some states are willing to give permissions without thinking of environment, without thinking of tribal development, without thinking of displacement, without thinking of rehabilitation. So they have to think about the rehabilitation of the tribals. They have to think of development of tribals before they construct any projects. States sometimes they are, instead of giving permission without any scrutiny, scientific approach, and it leads to many other problems. And it may, that's why this is important to see that they important to see that implementation of pilots is very important. So based on my presentation, friends, I would like to come up with or come up with some conclusions. Maybe it is not conclusions, it is, one can even consider as a suggestions, because when you talk about development, displacement talked about culture of tribes. Therefore the right to preservation of the culture and language of tribals is very important. We have to protect their cultures. It's the responsibility of all state, citizens, civil society associations, and the people who are constructing projects in their area. Because it's the response of each and everybody to protect to their culture and traditions. We have to see before you construct the dams, any development, we have to think from social and cultural perspective. And the scholars like Professor Alag talks about we have to review the plans, policies before we go for another policy. Previous policies have to be reviewed, either properly implemented or not. Response of the state and response of the tribals and people, we have to think of from their point of view, their sociological aspects, cultural aspect we have to think of, and we have to review the policies before we think of anything. And one has to realize that cash, if you give cash, it may not help them substantially. Because when you are taking the land from them, I think we have to show them a new alternative land for them. Not only land, but it is a cultivable land we have to provide. The responsibility of the state to provide cultivable land. Not only land, but also we have to think of irrigation facilities, water facilities for their plant. And we have to think about the support structure, in financial support and intellectual support, technological support we have to provide them. Only before, when you construct the time, before we have to have a negotiations. Dialogue is very important. Any democratic set of friends, dialogue is very important. We have dialogue in democracy, so dialogue is very important. Negotiations very important. We have to negotiate. We have to have a dialogue. Then only I think we can convince the people through which dialogue. We cannot with coercive measures. We cannot convince them. Only through love, affection, what Gandhi talked about, through which we have to convince them. And then we have to, because development is very important. To develop projects are all equally important, but we have to think of tribals empowerment is also equally important. Substantial institutional support is very important. Substantial institutional support for development and marketing of tribal products. We have to encourage products which prepared by the tribals. Develop the forest-based professions with the technology, and affirmative action we have to follow, and health facilities we have to provide health for tribals, education for tribals, and provide employment for the tribals. Employment, sometimes provide employment based on the resources available in their areas. Develop industries based on the forest resources. Development, start industries, start institution, professional colleges, institutions in tribal areas, so that they educate in the professional colleges, so that they help, they also part of the this production based on the based on the resources. And participatory self-governance is very important. Participatory self-governance is very important because participatory politics very important. But without participation of any, it is very difficult to have no substantial development. You have to make people to in formulating the policies, not directly, but you have to take the suggestions. You have to participate. Self governance is very important, and implementation of acts. For example, right in 2013 Act, that's implementation of the right to fair compensation and transparency in land acquisition, rehabilitation and resettlement act. This act actually very important. This after the 6-7 decades of independence, we got this act. This act has to be implemented. Very important. It is only it needs willingness of the political leadership to implement, and the cooperation of tribals in implementation, and cooperation of the corporate agents who are constructing this very important we have to implement. And the rehabilitation policies may be so suitably modified to incorporate provisions that actually facilitate the affected people invest the compensation money in product assets. And one more aspect I would like to bring to your notice, that substantial contribution or substantial coordination between the state and center is a prerequisite for the development of tribals, because this coordination between state and central because we are in federal setup. When you deal with the tribal empowerment, construction of dams, so this coordination between state and center is very important. Implementation of tribal policies effectively is very important because they have to be implemented. It needs commitment. The commitment of political leadership, administrative leadership is very important. Not only at one stage, but at the village level, at taluka level, at district level, state level, and at the center level. So this uh, commitment is very important. Political leadership at each and every level, and respect the entitlement of tribals. Respect the entitlement travels to forest and resources. We have to respect their entitlement, their constitutional rights. We have to respect them. We have to protect their rights, entitlements with regard to forest and resources. And one more aspect I found, that need more professional educational institutions, and job-oriented programs. And besides this, sensitizing tribals also equally important. Sensitizing doesn't mean that, so we have to explain about the constitution, about the policies, about the education, about the positive aspects of the state. We have to sensitize tribals with regard to policies and implementation. And we need not only when always thinking about development, but also we have to think behind that. We have to think about the protections tribals. Implementation of subplan is very important. We have to implement subplans. Already they are there. One more aspect is important. Along with our national language, Hindi, right? We have to promote education in English as well, because they have to compete. It's not only within India, they have to compete with the other citizens of other countries. Therefore, English education is also equally important. On their own, they cannot afford this education. Therefore, we have state actually have to provide free education from actually KG to PG. From KG to PG, there has to be free education for tribals. If you see some states like Scandinavian countries, they give free education, welfare. They are also welfare states. They give free education, free employment, free health facilities. So as a welfare state, India already we are providing education for these sections. I think we have to now, still we have to do much for these sections. Free education from KG to PG is very important. Another very important aspect I found that we have to convert tribal hamlets, tribal colonies to panchayats. Right? There are many tribal hamlets today are not panchayats. When they are not panchayats, it is obvious that they will not get any uh, support from the state. When they are village panchayat, when they are panchayat, recognize the panchayats, so their access to resources, their access to all protections given by the state, so their access to health, because when it is village, so we start the state take initiative to start uh, uh, medical facilities, health facilities, and roads to the uh, tribal panchayats, and construct uh, schools in in the tribal panchayats, and you also develop connectivity, right, from my mainstream connectivity of mainstream from tribal to the urban, so that you can bridge the gap between the tribal localities and the urban places, so that their access to market, because when they stay away from the mainstream, that is urban or the rural mainstream panchayats, they are not access to market. When they are not access to market, they lose their bargaining power. Therefore, it is a converting tribal hamlets to panchayats is very important, because when you are panchayat, they get right to vote. Right to vote, they get right their entitlements. And one more aspect, friends, is very important. That is, we have to listen to tribals. As a citizen of the country, the state has to listen, or the officers have to listen to the tribals, accommodate their concerns, their demands prior to start any constructing projects or dams. Otherwise, so tribals uh, may not be brought to the mainstream and part of this nation building. So when they part of this mainstream politics, mainstream development, mainstream, social life, economical life, cultural life, so it is very difficult for them to be prosperous on par with others in the country. Others, which means we are those who are staying in the mainstream. That that's why I think tribal empowerment, but their livelihood is very important. Their livelihood linked with not only development, also their livelihood linked with their culture, livelihood linked with the tradition, livelihood linked with their empowerment. Therefore, we have to develop them holistically in terms of social development, economical development, political development, and cultural development aspects.